Sorry, Rabbi, I stay home.
Have an easy fast for all those who are fasting.
Amen. Thank you. Okay,
Beginning.
indeed. And a happy new year. And a happy new year. Okay. Almost ready. Okay, so yesterday we learned about liability for leaving sources of damage in a public thoroughfare. The one thing that we haven't seen yet is if there can be what did we call that? Partial responsibility? What?
Contributory fault.
Contributory fault, where the parties split the level of liability. So one party pays a certain percentage and another party pays another percentage. It seemed to be binary, at least from the halacha that we saw. But I believe that sometimes the Beis Din will also take that into account. Now, the next thing that we saw is that there's this special halacha that if I injure your property, that's what we saw, that's what we left off with yesterday. If I injure or damage your property, I don't have to ask you mechila. But if I injure your person, then I do have to ask you mechila. And similarly, if I steal from you. And it seemed from the sources that we were looking at yesterday, that the reason is because that there's emotional pain as well. And that needs to be appeased. That needs to be mollified in some way. Okay. So now there could be situations, like we pointed out yesterday, where property damage could also involve a tremendous amount of emotional pain, depending upon the item that's being damaged. What if it has extreme sentimental value and the person that caused its damage was negligent in the process? So it seems like the halacha does not take that into account. And it's I think that there's perhaps a Musar lesson to learn from that, is that the halacha is sort of telling us, don't get too attached to your stuff. When it comes to your body, certainly it makes sense. If a person causes injury to your body where there may be long-lasting effects, God forbid, then the guy needs to ask you mechila because there's ongoing suffering, and it's your body is your body. But when it comes to your property, um, there's no need for a person to ask you mechila as long as he pays you for the cost of the loss. Um, and the reason is because no matter how sentimentally attached you might be to your Mickey Mantle baseball card or the picture of your bubby, you shouldn't get too attached to anything in life. Okay, next. So let's go to the next halacha. She'ela. Misha zara kli merosh hagag la'aretz, v'lo haya tachtav kelim. So this is a classic case in the Gemara. A person who takes a utensil and throws it from a rooftop, okay, with the intent of it, clearly if gravity does its work, this utensil is going to break. And there were no cushions underneath. It's clear that if this hits the ground, it's going to break. So before this utensil is allowed to hit the ground, a guy takes a baseball bat and whacks it, and it blasts it to smithereens. Okay, so the question now is, who's liable for the breakage of the utensil? Yesh lachkor mi mitchayev benezek shenigram leba'al hakli. Hayim oto adam shazark hakli merosh hagag, oto echad sheiktim v'shibro b'makel. Who's liable? This is classic tort law, right? Who's liable? So remember learning this case in secular law?
In my mind last time we did this.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out. I think they're consecutive tort features, basically. I think they're both liable.
They're both liable. Okay, so the answer is Hazore Kli Merosh Agag La'aretz V'Lahaya Tachtav Kelim V'Kodam Acher V'Shibro B'Makel Kishubaber Kodem Shagi La'aretz Hareze Ha'acher Potter Mitashlumin. So the second guy is going to be Potter, the guy who whacks it with a baseball bat. Shahare lo shavar lo shiber ela klisha sofali shaver miyad bevadai. Because all he's doing is breaking something that was going to break anyway, without any doubt. V'nimtza kishover kli shavor misha shazarko. And therefore we view it as him breaking a broken kli. Breaking a kli that has no value is not liable. And uh, all he is he's nothing more than a causative damage. Now, what about the fact that he could have saved it? Could he have saved the kli? Could he have caught it? Aval. However, imzara kli merosh kago v'hayutachtav karim ukasasos. If, however, a person throws a kli from a high place, and on the floor there's mattresses and cushions, she'im yipol aleim lo yishaver, that if it would hit the ground, the kli would not break. V'kodam v'silkam ba'od hakli ba'aver v'nechbar hakli ba'aretz v'nishbar. Let's say a guy comes and pulls away the cushions so that it hits the ground and breaks. But had the cushion been left there, the kli would not have broken. Chayev oto echad shesilik et hakorim v'chein kol kayotze bazeh. The liable party is the person who pulled away the cushion. He's the one who's causing the damage. V'zeu das maran hashulchan aruch. However, v'yesh omrim dezenikra grama b'nezikin shegam hazorik v'gam hamesalik hakorim beturim v'afil hazorik atzmo shekadam v'silik hakorim potter v'zeu das harama. The Rama, however, disagrees, and he's of the opinion that both parties are going to be potter, meaning the person who threw it when there was cushions underneath, he's going to be potter, because he could say, when I threw the item, nothing was going to happen to it. The guy who pulls away the cushion says, it was already in flight. I'm only doing causative damage. I'm not damaging it proactively. I'm allowing it to get damaged. So therefore, the Rama is of the opinion that neither party is liable. And even if, therefore, the argument goes, even if the same person throws it from the rooftop and is able then to zip like the Flash and get to the bottom and pull away the cushion afterwards, then he'll still be potter according to the Rama, because when he threw it, he threw a kli that was supposed to land safely, and when he pulls away the cushion, he's only doing causative damage. So this would be a classic case of if a person seeks to cause damage to another maliciously, and he doesn't want to be held liable in Beis Din, you can always find a way to cause damage if that's what you want to do. Okay. Now, so he quotes the sources. So in the first case, where a guy breaks the kli with a baseball bat, who is liable? Who is liable? So according to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, the first party is liable. In other words, the guy who threw it off the roof. Okay. Okay. So let's see. He goes through a whole arichos here in the Rishonim. I want to get to the. Want to get to Okay, ule'inyan din zeh, hazori kli merosh hagag v'lo haya tachtav karim ba'adam v'hiktim l'shovro, pasak moran ha'shulchan aruch sham b'sif dalet hazori chayev ha'mishaber potter, dechashvinan le keshavur misha shezarko, because we consider it as if it was broken from the time that the guy threw it off the roof. Ule'inyan hazori kli merosh hagag v'haya tachtav karim v'kodem v'silkum v'nafal kli v'nishbar chayev, and as far as a person who pulls away cushions after they were put in place, and then the guy threw the kli. This is the machlok. This case is the machlokus between the machaber and the Rama. Pasuk HaShulchan Aruch kedas Rambam v'ilu berama hevi yesham and the zemikri grama b'nezikinu pater. And he says that this is a grama. Okay, so certainly we're not talking about Medine Shamayim. We're only talking about Medine Adam. But doing causative damage like this will certainly make you chayiv b'dinei shamayim, even if you can figure out a way to get off the hook. Okay, so let us go on to the next piece. Nigram lo nezek l'rechusho im ololo l'ma'aser. So the next question is as follows: Misha nigram lo nezek l'rechush haprati, ha'im yochol lenakos mecheshbon harevach hachayav b'ma'aser. This is really a side question, which is in Hilchos Tzedakah. What if damage was caused to my property? Can I deduct that from my calculations when it comes to tithing my income? So let's say I made $100,000 profit this year from which I want to tithe, okay? And as we learned before, tithing is either an obligation or a strong minhag. There's a whole wide variety, a whole spectrum of poskim who discuss whether you're chayiv in meiser, whether it's a minhag to take meiser, or whether it's just a good thing to do. But if a person accepts upon himself to take meiser, to tithe, so the question then becomes, what happens if, so I have $100,000 profit, but 50,000 of that, half of it gets destroyed in a fire, God forbid. Okay, so the profit, or let's say some other kind of financial damage occurs. And so what was originally my income no longer exists. So the question then is, so do I tithe from 100,000 or do I tithe from only 50,000? So the answer to that question is, Yesh mi sha'omer sheyochol linakot mecheshbon harevach hachayav b'maaser. So he says there is an opinion that says that you look at your net income. That's what he's quoting Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. You look at your net income, and if your net income was reduced by half because of damage to your property, so then you can deduct that from your net profits over the course of the year. Now that's possible even if your profit is cash and there's property damage that eats up those profits. So God forbid, let's say a guy's roof caves in and it's going to cost him $25,000 to fix the roof, okay? So he can say, well, yes, it's true that I made 100,000 this year, but perhaps the reason why I made so much money is that the Ribono Shel Olam wanted me to compensate me because he knew that my roof was going to crash in. So he wanted to soften the blow. So he gave me extra profit this year. So you're allowed to look at it that way. And therefore you can say, I'm only going to tithe from 75,000 because that's my net income. In other words, we look at all the things that occur to a person over the course of a year as their net loss and their net profit. So it is legitimate to say that because of this significant property damage, I look at that as part of the part of the spreadsheet of my net profits for the year.
To the net assets.
My net, well, it's not just assets because, yeah, and income. Yeah, right. Okay. And maybe we'll do just one more for today. Chayav adam laharchik devarim hagormim nezek lechavero. A person is obligated by halacha to distance sources of damage from his neighbors. Okay? Vafilu sha'osa otam betoch rishuto. Even if you're doing it on your own property, if these things can cause damage, like you have a source of smoke that causes damage, or something else that maybe is caustic that could spread to your neighbor's property, those things have to be distanced. Your neighbor can insist that you remove that. B'chachamim nasnu shir b'chol davar v'davar lefima sheroi lahazik. And the Chachamim have in the Mishnah and in the Gemara discussed these things in Maseches Bava Basra. How far do you have to distance a certain kind of tree that causes damage? How far do you have to distance a certain kind of plant that attracts bees or something, things like that? Okay. Anytime you don't know how far you have to distance these things from your neighbor's property, kidei shelo yazik, so that you don't cause damage, yesh lo laharchik lefi ra'os habikiyim sheyiru lo, or sheyaru lo, that you should distance it based upon what expert, let's say farmers, will tell you. You know, this kind of plant, because of its toxic nature, this is how far you'd have to distance it based on our experience. V'im oto adam shahaya osa b'malachto birshuto va'aver v'lo hirchik, kofen oto l'sale kanezek. And if a neighbor is doing work with this particular source of damage, and he doesn't want to, and he flagrantly just does whatever he wants, kofen oto l'sale kanezek, the Beis Din can coerce him to remove that and to move it. Uv'makom sheyesh safek u'moter lismoch, yesh omrim delechatchila aser lismoch v'im over v'samach enu yochel lisalko. And anytime that there's a suffix, is this a source of damage? Is it not? So the neighbor says, you're causing me damage, but the guy says, no, but I have experts who say that it doesn't cause damage. So lechatchila, you should be machmir and acquiesce to your neighbor's requests. But b'di'eved, if you don't, then the person does not have a legal ability to prevent you from doing whatever you want. In other words, the advice is be a mensch, even if there's a dispute on the matter, whether, among the experts, whether this thing that maybe is causing vibrations or is giving off smoke or is emanating some other kind of offensive and potentially damaging source. Let's say your neighbor says, hey, you're generating smoke, and smoke is a carcinogen, and I don't want my kids breathing in that stuff, but you say, yeah, but I have a group of scientists who say that there's nothing wrong with it. It's totally fine, right? And so the right thing to do is whenever there's a dispute among experts, and by the way, there's this whole deconstruction going on today, who's an expert? Medical experts are not the medical experts we thought they were. That's one of the side effects of the whole COVID thing, right? Is that, experts are not experts because they have vested interests in their own agenda, So, so one expert says, or one set of experts says this is harmful. Another set of experts say it's totally harmless. So lechatchila, don't get started with neighbors. The lechatchila aser lismach, but vim over b'samach enu yochel lisalko. But if the guy doesn't listen, then you don't have any legal abilities to prevent him. And here are his sources. So as far as the Rambam writes that if there's a suffix, whether this causes damage or not, you should not present that to your neighbor. The im avar va'asa hamotzi mechavero olav haraya. If the guy does set it up and you claim that you're being damaged, but it's not, you cannot prove positively that you're being damaged, then the burden of proof is upon you. Okay. Umashma shebevadai kofen lamazik lahasul harchik hanezek me'al hanizik. So from all this, it becomes clear that we coerce the person who presents the source of damage from the neighbor. And he then quotes the Sefer Pischei Choshen from Rav Bloy, who we've quoted many times before. That only when there's a suffix, whether this is going to cause damage or not, that we don't obligate him to remove the damage. He says, I don't understand. If lechatchila you're not allowed to set it up because there's a suffix, why then? So if so, then you're doing an offense against your friend. And therefore, if you've done it already, you're in the wrong. And the halacha is that if you offend someone, you're not forgiven until you appease him. And so therefore, how can we say that you're in the clear just because you've already set it up? So he says, "V'tirates the efshir the kevin shachshav hamazik muchzak eno chayiv listom v'afilu lotzeis yedei chovas shamayim v'chaver chayiv limchalo b'shoshem mevakesh mimenu mechila v'seim b'tzarch iyan ye'uyan sham." He says, if it's truly a suffix, then perhaps once a person has set up this apparatus on his property, and it's only a suffix whether it causes damage or not, at that point, halachically, I'm now I have an established pattern of doing this. You don't have proof positive that this is injurious to you or your property, and therefore I don't have to ask you mechila for having done it because there was no proof positive that what I'm doing is harmful. And so therefore, perhaps even yedei shamayim, I don't have to ask you mechila. Now, of course, what about the stress and the mental anguish that a person has when he feels that he's ingesting something harmful? So that's very subjective because maybe you're just a paranoid person who feels that, let's say a person sets up a high power antenna on his property and his neighbor says, oh, this is emitting microwave radiation, and oh my gosh, it's gonna cause damage. And then you have this back and forth. Does it cause microwave radiation? Does it not? But let's say it's a new neighbor, and you've had this antenna up for years, and the old neighbors never complained. And now this new guy comes along and he says, oh my gosh, what is this going to do to my kids, to my wife, or fertility, all of these other things? And it could be he has a legitimate claim, right? In other words, we don't know. It's sort of unresolved science. The people who are the experts for the cell phone companies will tell you there's nothing wrong at all. And then there are other people who will tell you, well, this is really noxious. So it could be that until the science is settled, you don't have an obligation to remove the antenna. So I think we'll have to hold it here for today because we're starting a few minutes early. So everyone have a meaningful Asara B'Teves fast. Take